Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy HP, and you're listening to the Unsportsmanlike Conduct Podcast, a podcast for the average Joe covering football and everything New York Giants. Today's agenda, I'm going to talk about the changes to the New York Giants coaching staff. I'm going to talk about Eli's retirement, and lastly, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming Super Bowl matchup between the 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. But before I do so, before I start going into these topics, I want everyone to please follow me on Instagram. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. I'm also on Twitter now. So everyone, please follow me on Twitter. That's _unsportsman. And lastly, but most importantly, if you're listening to this, you might as well subscribe, like, and comment on this episode. Let's get this show started. So as many of you know, Pat Shurmur, our former head coach, has been fired, essentially immediately after the Week 17 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Pat Shurmur failed to produce an offense that can muster first downs, produce big yards, and ultimately score enough points to win games. Week in and week out, we saw ourselves continuously in third and long situations, a poor usage of our offensive talent, where, whether Saquon Barkley may not be getting enough touches, or we see Sterling Shepard or Evan Ingram, even guys like Darius Slayton and Golden Tate not getting the targets that they deserve, that they should be getting in order to get the ball in space and create even more yards after the catch, and just sort of the poor utilization of this offense, the inability to draft offensive linemen to be able to protect our quarterback. I mean, we did see Eli Manning get killed under Pat Shurmur's first year as the head coach, and then the second year, while we did see some improvements in that offensive line, there were times where, I would say every week, we did see Daniel Jones under pressure, scrambling around, and look, Daniel Jones fumbled the ball a lot because he got sacked. So that's a testament to also how poor this offensive line played in those situations, in those down situations. And, just overall, we've had a bad producing team. And then similarly on the defensive side of the football, our defense couldn't get stops. We saw ourselves on third and short situations. Unfortunately, we even seen, our special teams played pretty well. And there would be instances where we were able to punt the ball and pin the opposing offense's teams pretty deep into their own side of the football field. And even in those instances where, opposing offenses started inside their own 20, 15, and 10-yard lines, we've seen those teams be able to drive on us, get first down after first down, whether it's through poor defensive play or the lack of discipline through hideous and atrocious defensive penalties. But we were on those same drives, we gave up touchdowns. Our defense was on the football field longer than our offense was, and that's ultimately sort of, why our team hasn't been that good under James Bettcher as a defensive coordinator, and our offense hasn't been good under Pat Shurmur as being the head play caller and head coach for the New York Giants team. This was the second time in a row that the New York Giants decided to hire a offensive coordinator as our head coach. As everyone remembers, before Pat Shurmur, we had Ben McAdoo for 2 years, in which the first year we had a pretty decent season. I believe we were 10-6 and made it to the wild card round and got knocked off by the Packers. But even in that season, the reason why we won 10 games is because of our defense, not necessarily our offense. Our offense also scored to, break that 20-point mark. So after having two offensive coordinators within 4 years to be the head coach for the New York Giants, the New York Giants management and ownership decided to go into a different route and end up hiring Joe Judge as the new head coach for the New York Giants. Joe Judge was previously a special teams coordinator for the New England Patriots, and also, in addition to being a special teams coordinator, he was also the wide receivers coach. It was actually in 2019, for the 2019 season, Joe Judge was promoted to be the wide receivers coach. Joe Judge had joined the New England Patriots back in 2012 as an assistant special teams coach, and then later ended up being fully promoted to the special teams coordinator in 2015. Joe Judge did a pretty decent job, actually a pretty good job with the special teams side of the football for the New England Patriots, because the New England Patriots were consistently ranked, within the top 10 in special teams almost every single year, including the 2019 season. But I'm not crazy about this hire as a head coach for the New York Giants. I wanted someone who had head coaching experience. I wanted someone who has been battle-tested, who has been able to turn around a football program, a head coach that's been in big game situations. And look, obviously Joe Judge was a special teams coordinator in several Super Bowls for the New England Patriots, but Joe Judge wasn't the primary coach for those football teams, right? Joe Judge doesn't have to call as many plays when you're on special teams because special teams is just one play. Special teams, there's only one play on special teams every time the special teams has to go out there, right? It's on a punt, a field goal, and a kick return. There's no other situations that special teams personnel or special team starters are usually going to be on the football field. Whereas with the defensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator is calling plays all game. An offensive coordinator is calling plays all game. A head coach is making sure that the right plays are called. The right plays are called all game. It's making sure that the staff, the coaching staff, and personnel out there is the right personnel that needs to be out there. The head coach is managing the situation, but instead we hire a special teams coordinator to be our head coach for the New York Giants. I just thought that this was the moment after hiring two failed offensive coordinators in the previous years. I thought this would be the time that John Mara and ownership would decide to bring in someone who has had head coaching experience, who's been in playoff games, who's possibly even won a Super Bowl. But I would have been okay if our head coach didn't win a Super Bowl. You know, I didn't need a head coach to come in to necessarily be the Super Bowl winner. I just needed a head coach that's been in big playoff games, has proven to turn around football programs. A couple of coaches that came to mind, you know, Ron Rivera, Mike McCarthy, and Matt Rule, who was the head coach for the Baylor football program. But instead of interviewing or even vetting out those options, we go for Joe Judge, and it's just one of those. You know, sometimes, you know, when I first started this podcast, a buddy of mine said the New York Giants are the are the new Cleveland Browns of the NFL. And I thought he was wrong. I thought he was so off base with that comment. But then you make decisions like this, and I kind of have to sit back and think, well, maybe he's right. Now, I'm not completely disappointed in hiring Joe Judge, but my expectations were that after having two coordinators in the previous 4 years be head coach for the New York Giants, we would probably go in a different direction, a direction where we've seen someone become a head coach before and turn around football programs, win big in-season games, and win big playoff games. Ron Rivera is one of them. He made it to the Super Bowl. He didn't win it, but he's shown that he can win big games. The Carolina Panthers, while they haven't always made it to the playoffs every year, they've been pretty damn competitive every year. Even on some bad, and that was a tough division with the Bucs, the Saints, and the Falcons. That's a tough division because even when the Buccaneers weren't the greatest team, their offense has always been hot. Their offense has always been high-powered because they've always had the likes of Mike Evans. I don't know. I don't understand the Joe Judge hiring, and I understand that Bill Belichick and Nick Saban, who Joe Judge has worked under his coaching career, you know, those two head coaches, obviously prestigious head coaches, Hall of Fame, legendary head coaches, had high praise for Joe Judge, but almost everyone does. Every head coach will have high praise for one of their staff members. That's just how it works. Do you really think Bill Belichick was going to come out and say Joe Judge isn't a qualified candidate? I'm sure Bill Belichick had said that about Matt Patricia and Brian Flowers, the head coach for the Miami Dolphins. Right? I think this is what people do. Nick Saban wasn't going to go out there and knock Joe Judge. Of course Nick Saban was going to praise Joe Judge. Why would he ruin Joe Judge's candidacy as a head coach? What's also alarming is I don't think Joe Judge was on anyone's radar to lead their team as a head coach. So we end up getting the outlier amongst the head coaching pool. I mean, this is the very first time where we've had a couple of head coaches that were big names, big-name head coaches that have proven to turn around football programs, or coaches that have proved to take their teams into deep playoff runs. I don't remember the last time we've had the likes of a coaching pool that included a Mike McCarthy or Ron Rivera, and then even Matt Rule, who was scorching hot coming out of this offseason. I think he took the Baylor team to a bowl game, which they did lose, but to me, I don't mind if the coach has experience if the coach loses a bowl game or a big important playoff game, as long as I know that he has the capability to take his team there. Because right now, that's the baby steps for the New York Giants. Right now, I just want the New York Giants to be competitive. That's what we have to do. Going into next season, and I'm so serious, I am not going to, when I do my season prediction, this offseason, I'm not going to have the Giants make it to the playoffs. I'm not, because those expectations are just way too far out. Right now, the New York Giants have to work on becoming a competitive football team. Win me 8 games, win me 7 games next year. And then we can build off of that. But there's no way we're going to go from 4 wins to a playoff team in 1 year. And for sure now, I have no confidence in that with Joe Judge as our head coach. Now, again, I don't want to knock Joe Judge and say he can't become a head coach. I'm just saying I don't see the experience there for him to be one. Essentially, in other words, there's nothing for me to get excited about heading into the 2020 football season. And I don't mean heading into the football season as we're heading into it now. Obviously, we still have one more. We have that major championship game left, which is the Super Bowl game. But just generally speaking, going into the offseason, even after the draft and free agency, there's nothing for me to be confident about. And it's going to be more of a wait-and-see situation as it relates to Joe Judge. Now, as everyone knows, when a new head coach gets hired, the head coach is usually responsible for essentially just repicking their own coaching staff, selecting their own offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and special teams coordinator, among other position type coaches. So Joe Judge ends up selecting Patrick Graham to be the defensive coordinator and, surprisingly, an assistant head coach. Patrick Graham was recently the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. For a lot of you who don't know this, the Miami Dolphins head coach is Brian Flores, who was recently the defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots. Patrick Graham was on the coaching staff, the defensive side of the coaching staff for the New England Patriots, and Brian Flores ended up bringing him along with them to be the head as he went on to be the head coach for the Miami Dolphins. Again, this is just another hiring, another coach selection that I'm not excited about. The coordinator positions for me are probably one of the more important positions or from a coaching staff that there is. It's one of the positions to me that I sort of hone in on. I usually can be more lenient with the head coach as long as we have good play callers on the offensive and defensive side. And usually these coordinators are also the ones that are heavily scouting players for their position groups. Right, the offensive coordinator is looking out for the top offensive playmakers, or whether it is at wide receiver, running back, tight end, and then even also ultimately the offensive line. Right, they're the ones who are working with the rest of the offensive coaches and those position coach groups to find the right talent for their schemes. Similarly with the defense, right, the defensive coordinator, along with the DB coach, linebackers coach, DL, the defensive line coach, those coaches are together working and scouting for players that are going to fit their scheme. Coordinators usually have different philosophies than the head coach in terms of, not necessarily in terms of the types of schemes that they want to run, and not necessarily different in that, they're bumping heads with the head coach, but, a head coach will hire a defensive coordinator based on what they think or based on how they agree with how the defensive coordinator is going to run their scheme. Right, so if I'm Joe Judge, I'm looking at Patrick Graham presenting his defense to me, and I'm okay with the scheme that he wants to run, then I'm going to put the go-ahead, and I'm going to, and as long as he checks all my boxes, I'm going to let him run his 3-4 scheme. I'm not going to force him to run the scheme I would like him to run. And so when it comes to, these coordinator positions, these are the types of positions I usually get more excited about, and Patrick Graham is just an underwhelming hire and decision for the New York Giants. And, I'm guessing Joe Judge, Joe Judge knows Patrick Graham more than us New York Giants fans do. We can always look at the stats, the box scores, his recent sort of stint as a defensive coordinator with the Miami Dolphins, and we can say maybe he's not the greatest candidate for our team, but Joe Judge knows him better, so I am going to try to trust him there. But until I actually see the output of this team, I have to rely on the stats and his rankings as a defensive coordinator for the Dolphins. Patrick Graham and the Miami Dolphins defense were ranked 32nd in points allowed, 30th in yards allowed, 29th in yards allowed per play. They gave up the second most penalties in yards, and they finished dead last in sacks. They only gave up 23 sacks. Well, the Giants, they did a bit better than the Miami Dolphins. The Giants were 22nd amongst 32 NFL teams in sacks, in which they generated 36 of those 36 sacks, right? So they generated more sacks than the Miami Dolphins did. And granted, I understand that the Dolphins' defense didn't have that much talent, so there wasn't much maybe for Patrick Graham to work with. But then if that's the case, why not go with the defensive coordinator that has a proven track record? Because as it stands right now, Patrick Graham does not have a proven track record. And again, these decisions, or my frustration with these decisions, isn't about whether I think the people have a capability to coach or not. Joe Judge and Patrick Graham, they may end up eventually being great for the New York Giants, but as it stands right now, there is no track record. So I'm not sure what Dave Gettleman and Giants ownership is thinking of when they're bringing in these coaching candidates. We went from bringing in offensive coordinators who had decent track records as offensive coordinators. The last 4 years, we had 2 offensive coordinators who didn't really have great head coaching experience. And granted, Pat Shurmur did when he was previously head coach for the Browns, and he stunk up the place. He wasn't a good head coach there. So after failing to get 2 good head coaches in the last 4 years, why not go with something that works? In addition to that, why not go with a defensive coordinator where there's proof in the pudding? James Bettcher didn't work well for us. And, James Bettcher was actually a pretty decent coordinator with the Arizona Cardinals before joining the New York Giants. We just failed to give him the right personnel. Also, I would say even equally, there were times where just the play calling from the defensive side was just atrocious. The lack of creativity, the lack of pass rushing, the lack of blitzing on James Bettcher's part. I mean, James Bettcher deserves to not be a part of this New York Giants coaching staff. I don't know. There's just nothing to be excited there. There's nothing to be excited about. Whereas you see the Washington Redskins, they're making high-profile decisions. Ron Rivera as the head coach, Jack Del Rio as the defensive coordinator. I just want some proven names. Some names that we know players are going to respect. People who have commanded locker rooms. I don't think Joe Judge as a special teams coordinator commanded a locker room. Excuse me. I don't know if Patrick Graham ever commanded a locker room. He was only a defensive coordinator for 1 year with the Dolphins. This is not something that the New York Giants fans can get excited about, and I don't know what we're going to do if we had James Bettcher, who you can argue is a better defensive coordinator because it's proven than Patrick Graham, was unable to produce a good defense. How do we have the confidence to hire Patrick Graham as a defensive coordinator when he stunk up the place as well by coaching the Dolphins? And I'm going to give people a little bit more background because I decided to do some background research on Patrick Graham and the type of scheme that he runs. Patrick Graham ran a 3-4 with the Miami Dolphins. He ran he ran some interesting sets. He liked to play with a lot of good linebackers. He'd like to run packages where there were a lot of linebackers on the field. There were times where there would be 3 linemen, 3 linebackers, 5 DBs. But the base of that defense is primarily 3-4. But there were times where there would be 4 linebackers and 6 DBs, or even sometimes with 1 lineman down, right, hand planted, 3-point stance. And the rest of the linebackers are in a 2-point stance, and then you have 5-6 DBs out on the field. Well, let me tell you something. Our DBs stunk up the place last year. We were poor on defense because we couldn't get to the quarterback in a 3-4. The reason why, we didn't have good outside linebackers. We don't even have a primary middle linebacker who can command the front 7 and be a captain of this defense. So how is that type of scheme going to be successful when we are clearly lacking in defensive personnel, especially in our linebacking group, which is where Patrick Graham and Brian Flores use most of that personnel to get to the quarterback. You know how many times they would send in linebackers, especially on stunt plays, where linebackers go, making pretend he's going through the B gap and then he rolls back out and around right into the A gap, or vice versa. We don't have linebackers to do that. So how are we going to be successful in a Patrick Graham ran defense? And now I want to touch upon our offensive coordinator, which was our last, which was the last signing for our coaching staff to complete the coaching staff. It was former head coach for the Dallas Cowboys, Jason Garrett. This is probably the one signing of the coaching staff that I was okay with, that I was actually happy with, more than okay with, but rather happy with. Jason Garrett coached Ezekiel Elliott and Dak Prescott and that premier offensive line to top 10 offenses year in and year out. The Dallas Cowboys have owned the New York Giants over the last several years, have been very competitive, and almost at the top of that NFC East division year in and year out. And granted, I know that they don't always make it to the playoffs. They haven't always been successful in the few chances they've been into the playoffs, but they've always been competitive, and they've always been more competitive than the Giants. They've gave the Giants a run for their money. They've been always better than the Redskins. It's always been sort of the Dallas Cowboys and the Eagles that have been always fought for that top position in the NFC East. I know a lot of people are criticizing, have criticized Jason Garrett for not being the greatest head coach. That sometimes his play calling gets a little stale. He's not as creative with the play calling. That there have been times where he takes the ball away from Zeke and forces Dak to throw more than he should have. He goes away from the running game when he should be relying upon it. Something that we've witnessed with Pat Shurmur. Right? I mean, with Pat Shurmur, we've seen, Pat Shurmur not hand the ball off, not call plays to hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley enough. But I think this is almost perfect fit for Jason Garrett and the New York Giants. We have Saquon Barkley, who you can say is equally as good as Ezekiel Elliott. And we have Daniel Jones, who is our Dak Prescott. Daniel Jones can be our Dak Prescott. I know that Dak Prescott doesn't fumble the ball nearly as Daniel Jones does. I know Dak Prescott's a more careful thrower. Maybe Jason Garrett can fix those turnovers that Daniel Jones is so prone to doing and that we've seen in his rookie year. It might provide a little context. Daniel Jones didn't throw that many interceptions. As long as you stay under 15 interceptions, I'm okay with that. I think he threw about 11, 12, 13 interceptions. It was the fumbles that were more sort of head scratchers rather than the interceptions. Maybe Jason Garrett can fix that. Jason Garrett's going from having an Ezekiel Elliott and a Dak Prescott quarterback running back tandem to having a Saquon and a Daniel Jones running back and QB tandem. I don't think it gets any better than that. It's almost as if he's staying consistent with the type of personnel that he's coming into. Daniel Jones showed a ton of promise, and it's clearly shown that he's the future for the New York Giants as our quarterback. And we all know what we're getting with Saquon. Saquon Barkley still had, I believe, 1,000 yards rushing, and this was with missing 4 games. This is also with coming back and clearly being injured. We saw how great he ended the year this season. Those last 4 games, he tore it up. Because right when he finally got healthy, he was explosive. He was hitting the gaps harder. He was able to bounce the ball outside harder. So I think this is the perfect situation. Think about it like this. Jason Garrett coached up premier offensive linemen that have been candidates for the Pro Bowl almost every single year since he's been a head coach. Even dating back to maybe when he was an offensive coordinator. You know what that tells me? That tells me that Jason Garrett, while he may not have been the offensive line coach, Jason Garrett has an eye for talent. He has an eye for offensive lineman talent. Maybe he can help us fix our offensive line because we're a couple of pieces away. We have Kevin Zeitler. We have Will Hernandez. What do we do with Nate Soldier? Maybe he can replace or sort of reshift Nate Soldier's position as our left tackle. Maybe he puts him somewhere else on the offensive line to get better production. Jason Garrett is probably the most perfect candidate for the New York Giants. Jason Garrett has coached in the NFC East. That's all he's been known to do. He has faced opposing teams' defenses for so long, for the 10 years or however long he was as part of the Dallas Cowboys coaching staff. He knows how to exploit these defenses. He's used to everyone's schemes. Granted, the Redskins are probably the only team he won't be as familiar with because they're going to have a whole new coaching regime along with a whole new defensive coordinator with Jack Del Rio being there. But maybe we have an actual better chance to beat the Eagles, which we haven't been able to do so in how long? Maybe we'll have a better chance at beating the Dallas Cowboys, which we've been swept last year. I'm sick and tired of losing. I'm sick and tired of seeing an offense that finds itself in 3rd and long situations. I'm sick and tired of seeing an offense that finds itself not being able to produce first downs and even break the 20-point mark. Maybe, just maybe, Jason Garrett can be that guy. And I want to provide more context about why I like this Jason Garrett, this decision to have Jason Garrett as our offensive coordinator. Dak Prescott, as much as I criticize him on my podcast, the statistics don't lie. He's been a top 10 quarterback from a QBR perspective since his rookie year. Since Dak Prescott's rookie year, It wasn't up until late last season where they got towards at the midpoint, the trade deadline, when the Dallas Cowboys, I believe, got I think it was at the trade deadline when the Dallas Cowboys traded for Amari Cooper. But before then, Dak Prescott had his receiving group included a declining Des Bryant and a declining Jason Witten, and he still produced top 10 quarterback numbers. He was so careful as a quarterback. He was freakishly accurate. And I know that Dak Prescott never took chances, and the offense didn't allow him to take chances. But think about it this way: Pat Shurmur's offense let Daniel Jones take chances, and Daniel Jones threw interceptions and fumbled the football. Okay, Dak Prescott was not fumbling the football, and he wasn't taking that many chances, and as a result, he was careful with the football, and the ball stayed on the offensive side. We weren't giving up momentum-shifting plays. If Jason Garrett can coach up Dak Prescott to produce that before having Amari Cooper, imagine what he can do. And we've seen what he was able to do with Amari Cooper there, and then a rising Michael Gallup. And then in this season, they also signed Randall Cobb. We've seen what that offense could do. And I know, again, there were instances where the Dallas Cowboys offense just stalled out. But imagine what he can do with this wide receiving core. Now, there's been some speculation that maybe Golden Tate may not stay on the New York Giants. But let's just for argument's sake, let's say he does stay on the New York Giants. You have Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, who's our clear deep threat, Golden Tate, Evan Ingram, Caden Smith, who's been an emerging tight end since Evan Ingram got injured. And even if we don't sign Evan Ingram, we have Caden Smith, who's been Daniel Jones, that was one of his favorite targets as well, Caden Smith. With those weapons, I think Jason Garrett can coach up a pretty good offense. And we also have Saquon Barkley. So I think our offense is more far along than our defense is. I think our defense still has tons to prove, and which is why I was disappointed in our defensive coordinator decision in hiring Patrick Graham. But with Jason Garrett, there's not much more left to work on, is there really? We have all the receivers we need. We have the tight ends. We have the running back. We just need to fix the offensive line and just call better plays. And I think Jason Garrett's going to do that. We play 6 games against our division rivals in our division. 2 of those teams, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys, Jason Garrett is accustomed to. He knows the personnel in and out because he's coached the Dallas Cowboys for the last decade. And 2, he's faced the Philadelphia Eagles ever since he's been on the Cowboys coaching staff. So he gets it. So now we have a coach that can not only help us probably take over and beat our rivals, or at least at a minimum split the division series, because we got swept by the Eagles and the Cowboys, which there's no way we're going to make it to the playoffs if we get swept by those teams again next year. That's already 4 losses. And now we just have a fighter's chance. I think Jason Garrett gives us a fighter's chance in every game. I think with Jason Garrett, we will hit the 20-point mark on an average for the whole season. You can't tell me that on a week-to-week basis, Daniel Jones won't throw 2 to 3 touchdowns. That Jason Garrett won't find his way to get Saquon Barkley out for another touchdown. Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, they will count for 2 to 3 touchdowns every single game, each. I think Jason Garrett finds a way to do that because that's how Dak Prescott has had Pro Bowl seasons, top 10 seasons. That's how Ezekiel Elliott was known to be the top running back. And we've all seen it for everyone that plays fantasy football. If you look, I don't watch the Dallas Cowboys every day, right? We're in New York. We can't always watch the Dallas Cowboys. But for fantasy owners who've had Ezekiel Elliott or who have planned to at least try to draft him or trade for him, we know how valuable Zeke is. This was apparently supposed to be a down year for Zeke. He still ran for over 1,000 yards. He was still a potent offensive player, and this was just signing an extension right before I think either late into training camp or right before training camp. I forgot the timeline of that, but Jason Garrett was still able to have those 2 guys produce great stats, and I'm a firm believer. I don't care how good of a player you are, you can't produce good stats unless your coaches put you in a good position to do so. It's not like basketball. Basketball is a little more ad hoc. You get the ball, and there's not much play calling there. With football, every single play is a play call. Every single play, the ball is designed to go somewhere. right? And, let's talk about it from a passing perspective. A passing play, there's a number 1 read, there's a number 2 read, there's a number 3 read. But every single passing play, there's one guy that you hope to get the ball open to, and if that doesn't work out, the quarterback goes to the second and third read. Same thing with from a running perspective. Running plays are designed for a specific gap to open up for specific people to be blocked to have that running back be successful. I think it takes more of a coach for a player to be successful than it is a good player to have good statistics. I think Jason Garrett helps us get a little bit more closer to being a competitive football team because I think this year I have actually high expectations for our offense. And I thought that was a good signing by Joe Judge because, look, Joe Judge he was a special teams coordinator and then he was a wide receivers coach. Other than that, there's no clear sort of experience with coaching an offense and play calling on an offense. Jason Garrett was a head coach for the Dallas Cowboys, and he wasn't successful, but their team was competitive every single year. He wasn't that great of a head coach, but now he goes back to strictly play calling and focusing on one side of the football. I'd like to think that someone who has reduced responsibilities and a more focused responsibility can be more successful at their expertise. Jason Garrett's expertise wasn't to run a football program. His expertise was to run an offense. And now he's back at that. And in a comfortable space, right? It's not like he's going outside of a division or outside of a conference. He's staying within the same division. So, folks, that's my take on the coaching staff. I now want to go into Eli's retirement. After 16 great NFL years with the New York Giants, Eli Manning retires. And, Eli Manning was my first quarterback. Guys, for all my listeners out there who don't know, I'm 26 years old. And when I became a Giants fan, it was a couple of years before the Giants had actually gone on a Super Bowl run. I believe it could have been the wild card year where the New York Giants lost to the Carolina Panthers. My memory is very vague of the first time I actually knew and became a New York Giants fan, but nevertheless, Eli Manning was my first quarterback. I never had another quarterback. So all the speculation of Eli being done, over the last couple of years where people are talking about Eli Manning not being a good quarterback anymore, for all my close sort of friends out there and all the people that I've talked football with, they would know how much I've batted for Eli Manning. I've had his back. I've supported him because even through his down years, for some reason, I never stopped believing. And I just want to thank Eli Manning for an awesome 16 years of football, but most importantly for those 2 Super Bowls. If you follow my Instagram, you'll see this post that I had, and it's true. This wasn't a post that I wrote, out of, it wasn't an artificial post. It was not an artificial post. It was really straight from the heart. There aren't too many times where I remember being the most ultimate level of happiness, aside from when the New York Giants won those 2 Super Bowls back in 2008 and 2012. And I will never forget those Super Bowl runs. I'll never forget those playoff runs. I cheered for Eli. I celebrated for Eli. But I equally yelled at Eli, and I even cursed him out. I remember last year, not this past season, but the season before that, at the home game against the Washington Redskins, Eli Manning had a bad game, and I was cursing out Eli Manning in the fourth quarter, and I was so close to actually running down because we were about 30 rows. Me and my buddy were about 30 rows away from the field, and I was so close to running down, taking off my Eli Manning jersey, and throwing it on the football field. That is how angry I was at Eli Manning. But he provided great memories, provided us such clutch moments, such amazing throws. And I know equally he's thrown a lot of interceptions. We've had many years without being into the playoffs, a lot of consistent years. But, one thing you could say, you can't say about Eli is that Eli Manning never quit. He never made excuses. Every time he played poorly, every time there was an off-the-field issue with another team member, like OBJ or like a Plaxico Burress, or like a Janoris Jenkins or Eli Apple, he was always there in front of the cameras, always answered the questions the right way, was always open to the media, and I thought he went out the right way, and he's going to forever be a hero in New York City and for the rest of us New York Giants fans. I mean, for me, it's like if I'm a deli owner, if I'm a pizza store owner, and I see Eli Manning walk in, I'm giving him a free pie on the house for life. And I think this is the perfect way for Eli Manning to go because it would hurt my heart Honestly, it would hurt my heart to have Eli Manning leave the New York Giants, play for another team, and then possibly maybe stink it up for another team, and then get benched, and then he retires. This is the first real season where he ends up really legitimately getting benched. I know he got benched when he was playing with Ben McAdoo, but that was sort of a really iffy decision because there still wasn't no clear-cut quarterback to take over the league. This is the first year where I think it hit Eli Manning and obviously the rest of his fans where, Eli Manning's time with the New York Giants is done. Daniel Jones is now our future. And I just want to obviously applaud, Eli Manning for how he handled that situation and not causing a circus, and which is very hard to do in New York media. Eli Manning handled that whole situation with the utmost professionalism. And what would make me smile is every time Daniel Jones was done with the drive, he'd be right next to Daniel Jones, holding that iPad or that tablet rather, the Microsoft Surface, and just kind of going over the plays of what he saw. And it looks like maybe he was asking Daniel Jones what Daniel Jones may have saw in certain plays and certain throws, and that's essentially what Eli Manning was. He was full of class and he was a true teammate. And you never hear anyone say anything wrong about Eli Manning, and that's just essentially, you have to thank someone like that to be the leader of your organization for a little over a decade. Eli Manning, you will be missed. Again, he was my first quarterback, and hats off to you for a tremendous career. If you guys look at my YouTube channel, I forgot which episode it is exactly, but I do have a whole episode dedicated to my explanation as to why Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer, and that hasn't changed. So I want everyone to go take a look at that. This was during the offseason. I was kind of running out of content, so I figured, you know what? We all kind of know with the drafting of Daniel Jones, this may be Eli Manning's last season, so why not make an episode dedicated to running down Eli Manning's accolades and explaining why he's a Hall of Famer. So he's a Hall of Famer in my book. I know his 500 record going 117 is something that people are excusing why he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. His interceptions or the long droughts, the long playoff droughts, or the consistent playoff droughts rather, for the New York Giants not making it to the playoffs. But when you win 2 Super Bowls, especially the way he has, because he had great playoff runs. It wasn't like Eli Manning was carried in those Super Bowls. Eli Manning had to single-handedly win some of those games on late quarter drives, and he did that for us. And just my hats off to that, and thank you so much, Eli, for being a great New York Giant. And then lastly, to cap off this episode, I want to talk about the Super Bowl. The last game of the 100th NFL season will be played in Miami between the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. And as it stands right now, the spread between the Niners and the Chiefs, Kansas City -1, which essentially, folks, a pick 'em. This is going to be a great game. I'll be honest, I was when I was watching the Tennessee Titans versus the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Titans took a 10-0 lead early. I figured, maybe if the Titans can score another touchdown, go up 17-0, maybe force a turnover, momentum shifting play, maybe the Titans can run away with this thing, and this would be probably the hugest playoff run that we've seen in quite some time. Because that will end up making it 3 straight upsets, right? They upset the Patriots, they upset the Ravens, and I'm like, well, if they can upset those 2 teams, they have a fighter's chance against the Kansas City Chiefs. But as I was watching that game, I really didn't want the Tennessee Titans to win and make it to the Super Bowl, just because, look, don't get me wrong, the Tennessee Titans, great defensive team, knew how to run and pound the ball. They always knew how to win time of possession. But I didn't want, Super Bowls are for star-studded teams. For big, impactful teams that are, you want the best teams throughout the season to make it to the playoffs. And sometimes I feel like with the NFL, we don't always get to see that. Similarly to the MLB, we don't always get to see the best teams at the very end. Whereas with the NBA, whoever has the best all-stars are always going to make it to the NBA Finals. It's different with football and the MLB. And I personally just thought a Tennessee Titans Super Bowl was going to be a little boring from a fanfare perspective. Now, look, obviously, people like me who love football will end up watching the Tennessee Titans. We would have ended up watching the Tennessee Titans and seeing how they played and dissecting their play calling and their offensive and defensive schemes. But I think from a grand picture perspective, it was good that the Tennessee Titans didn't make it and that the Kansas City Chiefs did, because who doesn't want to see Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid in that high-octane offense in the Super Bowl? And then similarly on the other side, I wasn't too concerned with who won because I thought either way there was going to be a good storyline and good players and good hype around it. With the Green Bay Packers, I felt like the storyline would have been Patrick Mahomes versus Aaron Rodgers, and and as we see with the 49ers, I felt like the storyline is, well, look, this defense has been hot all year, has been a stout defense. How will that defense against the Kansas City Chiefs offense look like in a Super Bowl matchup? So I thought either way it would make for a good, high-rated Super Bowl. And also you kind of avoid, again, you never know what's going to happen when you go into the Super Bowl, but I doubt this is going to be a blowout. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. Not necessarily high-scoring, but I think teams are going to be forced. There's going to be a lot of pressure to score the ball. I think what we're going to see is a lot of big plays happen, where it's going to force either the Chiefs to maybe go away from the running game and have Patrick Mahomes force the ball down the field. And similarly, maybe for the San Francisco 49ers, when let's say the Chiefs, get down a bit and the Chiefs are able to score maybe 10 points within two straight possessions, and then that forces Jimmy Garoppolo and company to throw the ball and then sort of give up on the running game. I think there's going to be instances of that where we see time of possession being a crucial sort of element to the game, where one team's drive stalls out quicker because they're trying to take too many chances to catch up. Now, my prediction for the game, I think the 49ers are going to win. As we've seen with the first two games from the Kansas City Chiefs, the Chiefs were down early and big against the Texans, but fortunately due to some bad play calling by Coach O'Brien and just some boneheaded plays and mistakes by the Texans' special teams, we saw the Kansas City Chiefs get back in the game and essentially run away with it and blow out the Texans. Then the following game after that, we see the Titans get up early in a 10-0 lead. That's a pretty good lead to start off the game. That's what you call momentum. But then after that, the Titans couldn't score any points. And the main reason for that is because you had Ryan Tannehill at your quarterback. The Titans don't have a deep receiving core either. Their best receiver is A.J. Brown, who's a rookie. So, and then at that point, it's easier to contain the running game, and that was the game that the Titans' running game didn't work. Derrick Henry got held to 69 yards. You hold a premier running back who's responsible for producing, more than half of the team's offense. If you're able to contain that guy, your chances are very high of winning the game, and that's what the Chiefs did. They won. But the key thing is they started off slow. The key thing is that they were down more than one possession very early in the first half. And now if that happens a third straight game, which is very plausible, I don't think the 49ers will give up a lead. I think if the 49ers go up 10-0, I think they have more of a capability to stop the Chiefs from tying the game than the other two teams did, because the other two teams didn't have nearly a complete defense that the 49ers did. And I think that's going to be key. Who knows if maybe the Niners can force a quick turnover, get some good field position, run the ball. The Chiefs' defense isn't that good. I don't think the Chiefs' defense is as good as the 49ers' defense is, and I think the 49ers' offense is a bit better to combat the Chiefs' defense. I'm not too crazy high on the Chiefs' defense. They're not always consistently getting to the quarterback. They can't always stop the run game. Their secondary is still a little sketchy. I know they got Tyrann Mathieu and Fuller back there, but they don't consistently turn the ball over and make enough plays from the defensive side of the ball for me to believe that I think that they can stifle this 49ers offense. I also think this is Kyle Shanahan's sort of redemption game. We all know he was the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons when the New England Patriots came back from that, a 24-3 lead. I think he was waiting to make it to the Super Bowl. He wanted to make it back. I think from a coaching perspective, he may be, if not equally, maybe even more hungrier than Andy Reid here, because he has something to prove. I think this is his redemption game, and I think the play calling will be much more better. I think from a weapons perspective, you can even make the argument, aside from quarterback, Niners, Chiefs, I think they have equally good weapons. I know I'm going to sound crazy, but Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, I'm not saying they're the same. I know Tyreek Hill is a better wide receiver, much more of a big play threat, and a better route runner than Deebo Samuel. But Deebo Samuel can run a route well, is an explosive, fast receiver also. They both have a good number one wide receiver. The Chiefs have Sammy Watkins as their number 2. The Niners have Emmanuel Sanders as their number 2. I would say they're both equally good. They're both equally good. I don't think one's that much better than the other. From a quarterback perspective, yeah, Patrick Mahomes is ways better than Jimmy Garoppolo. But I would argue that the San Francisco 49ers have a better offensive line and probably have, I personally think they have a better running game than the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think Damian Williams is that much of a threat. I don't think they have a true lead running back. Whereas with the 3 running backs that the 49ers have, they're able to get, if any one of them gets hot, they're just going to ride the hot hand. And we've seen that all year. That's what the 49ers have done. They've ran the football, and they play great defense. With knowing that they have the possibility to pass. If Jimmy Garoppolo is forced to pass, he can help them win games. Jimmy Garoppolo has barely passed in these last 2 playoff games against the Minnesota Vikings and against the Green Bay Packers. Because he didn't need to. But they know he could. That's why guys like Debo and Emmanuel Sanders and George Kittle, they didn't have the biggest playoff games because their number didn't get called yet. And that goes to my the third position at tight end. That's essentially a draw-up too. That's a toss-up. George Kittle, Travis Kelce. I would probably give it a little bit of an edge to Travis Kelce. He's done it a bit longer. But you couldn't tell me that one guy is so far. You couldn't tell me Travis Kelce is way better than George Kittle. I wouldn't make that argument. Probably like a 1A, 1B type of situation. The only clear advantage that the Chiefs have is that quarterback. But from a wide receiver perspective and a running game perspective, I don't think the Chiefs are that much better. Again, I would say that the Niners' running game is better than the Chiefs. And I don't think from a receiving core perspective, including tight ends, I don't think the Chiefs are that much better than the Niners. And folks, that's my prediction for the Super Bowl. I have the Niners beating the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's about it. That's this episode. Everyone, please make sure you subscribe, like, and comment on this video. It's your boy HP. Peace out.